Uncertainty and the unknown does not have to equal anxiety or fear. That's what today's presentation is on: finding solid ground, anxiety, fear, insecurity in uncertainty. And first, I want you to consider that sometimes it's kind of fun not to know. I put a picture of a person playing tennis because if you're playing tennis, it's kind of fun to play with an opponent who's like a good match to you, where if someone's like so good, I mean, you might step up your game and like try your hardest because you might know, I don't know, maybe I'm going to win. But it's kind of fun when someone's like a little bit equal to you because, you know, you're hitting it, the score is tight. Like if you were to play a toddler, it might not be as much fun unless you love that toddler and you're just having a good time. But I want you to consider, are there some times where it's fun not to know? What about when you start a book and you don't know the ending? It's like a murder mystery or just anything. Like there's always some sort of unknown because that keeps us engaged. Same thing if you're watching a movie, a TV show. It's fun. It's fun to be a little bit uncertain. What's going to happen? Like we're on the edge of our seat. You know, and I know that it's so true. I really, sometimes there's a lot of times where it's fun when I don't know. You know, so I want you just to even consider, oh, wow, the unknown and uncertainty, it doesn't have to equal anxiety. You know, the unknown is just the unknown. Uncertainty is just uncertainty. What happens with anxiety, insecurity, it creeps in when we start feeling the unknowns in our life with fearful imaginary scenarios. And our brain, it loves us so much. It doesn't like things that are unknown or uncertain. You know, that could be a big threat to our survival. So our brain tries to think of, well, you know, our brain thinks it might be helpful to think of, let's think of the worst case that could happen because then we'll be prepared. And that's what a lot of people think, you know, is that maybe anxiety is going to help them. We're going to get to that later because anxiety is actually never helpful, besides that it's an invitation. But what's going to be helpful is your wisdom and common sense. But back to this, you know, anxiety creeps in when we start filling our imagination, filling in those unknowns with our imagination. You know, anxiety can really be a habit of letting our minds wander into the realm of frightening, fictional futures. But when we don't know that, we can think, wow, that feels really real. And it does because we feel our thinking with all of our senses. I bet you can think of times where you worried about something and then you went there and it didn't end up happening. You know, they did a study about what people worry about, and they said 85% of what they worry about never happens. But of the 15, about half said, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And the other half said, I handled it much better than I thought, or I'm surprised at how well I handled that. You know, and so can you think of a time when you had a lot of imaginary thinking about a future scenario and it didn't turn out that way? You know, you might be saying, well, sometimes I'm right. Sometimes I did think, what if I had a panic attack? And I did. But, you know, let's set that aside. Can you think of a time when you were worrying about something and there was really no reason for it, that was in your imagination? I can think of so many times with clients, you know, where they worried about having a panic attack on an airplane and then they didn't. They were like, so many times when they said, you know, that party was easier than I thought, or yeah, that flight was easier than I thought, or sometimes they say, yeah, I did. I had a panic attack on the cruise and it wasn't that bad. I'm surprised at how well I handled it. You've handled every bad day. You've handled every panic attack. You've handled every anxious moment. And future you will handle it too because you're made of wisdom and common sense. So really, what I want you to consider is that anxiety and fear are invitations. You know, one of my mentors, Dickon, he's so wonderful about talking about love. I just finished a 6-week-long course with him about living from the heart. And he really brings it home about how fear is love in disguise. Anxiety is love in disguise. Fear, when we feel fear or when we feel anxiety, that feeling lets us know that we've begun to use our imagination to create a sense of danger that is only there in our imagination. It really is. Danger is different from fear. Fear, it's an alarm, it's a wake-up call. So I put that little alarm. You know, fear, the feeling of anxiety, it invites us to leave our thinking alone because it's letting us know our imagination, it's not serving us right now. Just as I put the picture of the baby in the bath because our ability to touch the water of a bath, especially if we're filling it up for a baby, if it was really hot, that feeling would invite us, leave this hot water alone. It's not safe to put the baby in there. It's not safe for you to get in there. So when we feel fear, when we feel anxiety, that is an alarm, an invitation. Don't believe your imagination right now. Don't believe your anxious thinking. Leave it alone. Let it cool off for a little. You just hands off. It's such a gift. It is such a gift that we feel anxiety, that we feel fear. And it is a gift when we know that all it means is that our thinking is low quality, our thinking is not serving us, that our thinking is going to be distorted. Knowing that what's behind anxiety is distorted thought, it's not a problem if it's distorted when we know it. I'm not going to take this seriously because it's distorted, but it's temporary and it changes all on its own. Another premise is the feeling tells us about the clarity of our thinking. So when we feel anxious, when we feel insecure, when we feel fearful, they're not a problem at all, but it's just letting us know our thinking is distorted. But that's not a problem if we know that. When you understand that you're experiencing thought and the feeling tells us how clear your thinking is, you can see fear as an invitation to let go of your thinking, just temporarily, to make room for something new to come. Because, we've got this thinking, we've got our personal mind, we've got our brain. It's always narrating our experience and sharing its opinion. And sometimes its opinion is just going to be scary and made up because it would rather err on the side of caution. But when you see that, you're like, okay, my thinking is unclear. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it, be for a minute. Why is that helpful? Is because then it can make room for our wisdom to be there, our wisdom and our common sense, which is always there, just like a gentle flute. And the rest of our thinking is like this anxious loud brass band. But when we hear the band playing, we're like, oh, you wait just a minute, just a second. I'm not saying you have to sit there in meditation for 10 minutes. You just let go of your thinking for a second because it's distorted, to make room for a deeper, clearer mind in which there are resources that are rich and have everything you need. Whatever problem you're dealing with, it's no match for wisdom. I was just rewatching a video with Dickon Bettinger and Michael Neal. And Dickon was talking about when his son was in a car accident and he was in a coma. And him and his wife were in the hospital. And, and Dickon is just, he's such a gift. He's so wise. And he was saying, how can you think of it's hard to imagine being in a feeling of love when your child would be in a coma, but when you fall into that feeling of love and wisdom, you have such deep guidance. And so Dickon said what occurred to his wife was to sing, and she started singing, and his son's heartbeat was like at 113, and his wife started singing, and it went down to like 65. And he had I think his breathing was also really erratic, and that everything settled. And then his wife stopped and it went back up, and he said, keep singing and look at the monitors. And, so for 3 hours, him and his wife sang to his son is also okay. But when they didn't know if he was going to live and what was going to happen, you could think, well, that's a time to worry. That's a time to be anxious. That's a time to be afraid, and also there's nothing wrong if you did feel afraid. I don't know how I would feel, but I'd be grateful that I understand this, that I don't want to get guidance from that fearful thinking because I know it's not going to be clear. Being in this conversation allows me to kind of hang my hat that my wisdom is always there to guide me, whether it's something about our own health or the health of our child, or we're just have scary thinking about ourselves. Unclear, disturbed thinking is fine when you see it for what it is. Having a bunch of disturbed thought, anxious thinking, it doesn't do anything to you until you think there's a good reason for it, until you validate it. I was at Disneyland yesterday, and there was a lot of times when it was helpful to be in this understanding, tired, lots of crowds, lots of different family wanting to do different things. And my daughter wanted to leave after we'd been there for about 8 hours. But my son wanted to stay, and I was there with 2 of my sisters and their husbands and one of my sister's kids. And my daughter and I were leaving, and I was leaving my son with my sisters. And I could definitely had an old habit of worry about my kids. That's probably my number one thing that I have thinking about. So I had a lot of thinking about. And also even throughout the day, like my son and I were apart because he'd be going on rides with his cousins and I'd be, on different rides with different people. And my brain would pipe in about the dangers of him not being in my care. But it didn't do anything. I definitely had thoughts and images of what if he got lost in the park. But that thought didn't hurt me. It didn't do anything because I didn't validate it. There wouldn't be any good reason. So it'd be there. And I wouldn't do anything. And underneath that would just be this feeling that I know his aunts and uncles would take good care of him. But especially when I was leaving the park and leaving my son there, my brain was like, piping off about, scared for what if he got lost. And I didn't do anything. I didn't, it was just there. I didn't have to try to stop it. I didn't, because when we resist it, we stop it from flowing. But I didn't validate it because there wouldn't be any good reason for me to entertain these fearful thoughts. And so they'd come and go. And what was underneath that was just a feeling like, was solid ground that like, it's going to be okay. But sometimes people validate fearful thoughts. For example, I'll say a few things that I see about their health, because they might have seen people that have gotten ill and died, young people, people in their 30s or their 40s or their 50s. And so I have a lot of people that I work with this. Sometimes they get really worried about going to the doctors or about if there's any health concern. And their brain says, here's all these reasons, here's all this evidence. And that's totally fine. That really is. But if it's not giving you the feeling that you're wanting, then it might be helpful to look at it in a different way, because truly there really never is a good reason for a bad feeling. I'm not saying you have to be happy all the time, but when we don't feel good, our thinking isn't going to be helpful. I also see this true, or this kind of come up with people, whether they're dealing with intrusive thoughts, like they have a lot of fearful thoughts, and what if this, and what if this, all this uncertainty, how do I know for sure? Or probably anything. If someone is still experiencing derealization and they have existential thoughts, it can seem like, well, I got to think more and I have to entertain these thoughts. But when you truly see that your feeling just lets you know how clear your thinking is, how unhelpful your thinking is, it's like, oh, well, if I don't feel good, this doesn't mean, yeah, you should, because people die young or people become pedophiles or who knows about these existential thoughts. All it is letting you know, hey, leave your thinking alone right now, just for a second, to make room for something new to come up. You start to see, you start to really see anxiety and fear as beautiful feedback, just like the bath is hot, an invitation to let your thinking alone. And there is a difference between forgetting that the feeling tells us if our thinking is helpful and thinking that there's a good reason for a bad feeling. So we all forget, because, I learned this. I've been in the 3 principles conversation for about 6 years almost. And sometimes I forget. Sometimes I forget when it's around like time, and especially when like time in terms of, I want to be on time. I want to respect people's time, especially if it's like my family. I've had a lot of family in town recently. It's been such a gift. But I also have been navigating my son starting baseball and football, and so practices and games, and wanting to see family and wanting to know my family knows that I love them so much, and also working. And I share this in that sometimes I can get serious around my family, in that like I love them so much. Whether it's my small family, like my kids, I can sometimes fall into seriousness about their happiness, their safety. And then sometimes my extended family, like my parents and my siblings, like wanting them to know how much I love them, wanting them to be happy. And I saw like how kind of seriousness is like my kryptonite, because then I validate. When I get serious about something, I validate my thinking, and I sometimes forget that there's never really a good reason for a bad feeling. But I remember. That's when I remember. It doesn't mean that I instantly like get light again, but I kind of do. There's been quite a few times where I've been thinking, like, in the morning, sometimes wanting to get out of the house as fast as I can so I can see my sister, so she can know I love her so much and I want to see her kids. And then I can feel this tension. And that reminds me, wait. There's never a good reason for a bad feeling. Like, it's, so I truly love to remember. When we get stuck in a bad feeling, we've forgotten that it's thought and that it doesn't make sense and that there's a different way to look at it. So we can never be stuck, because when we remember, we're instantly not stuck, because we drop thought. We make room for something new and fresh. When we are anxious and we're ruminating, we're going over like old, stale information. And that's why it can feel stuck, because we're not like letting our thinking go, making room for something new and fresh. And anxiety, it is such a gift, because it lets us know that we've fallen into unhelpful, low quality thinking. It's really helpful to have moods. It really is. And I know I said this, just like we want to be able to feel if the bath water is too hot, or we want to, if we forgot to put in an oven mitt and we touch a pan, we feel hot. We move it back. We put it on an oven mitt. Just like I'm sitting in this kind of crisscross applesauce position, and I want to feel the pain when it lets me know, hey, move your position. This is our body and our mind communicating with us, letting us know, hey, move, leave your thinking alone, put on an oven mitt. It's all helpful invitations, helpful information, helpful signals. I have somebody who I had recommended she read Amy Johnson's book, The Little Book of Big Change. And this quote really resonated with her. And I was like, I got to put it in this presentation. So this is from Amy Johnson. Our natural state is that of pure well-being and peace of mind. The only thing that can obscure that wellness is the thought patterns, often subjective and habitual, that we find ourselves regularly lost in. Considering this spiritual principle makes it much easier to distinguish the addictive voice from truth. Simply put, when a thought creates pain, it is not objective reality. A thought or inner voice that produces suffering is biased and untrue personal thinking. That's everything that I've been talking about. The pain of anxiety, fear, insecurity, it wakes us up. And it lets us know that our thinking, it's not true. It's not objective reality. That's this untrue personal thinking. Often, our personal mind just making these imaginary future scenarios. Like my son getting lost at Disneyland. He's fine. He's safe. That was just imagination. And when we know that, we don't have to suffer as long. We can see fear, anxiety, insecurity as invitations to let go of our thinking and fall back into our natural state, which is pure well-being and peace of mind. And I'm not saying it has to be instant. I definitely was a tiny bit insecure until my son was safe at home. But I wasn't, the feeling of fear, anxiety, and insecurity yesterday when I left my son. I left him probably around 5 something. And it was very much just background. It was too, but it was something that was there because he's my boy, and I could fully drop my thinking when he's home at bed. He's home. But it didn't grip me. It didn't grip me by the throat. It was like a one. It was just there of so I'd fall back into that peace of mind, and I'd relax. And sometimes I'd remember he's not with me. He's at Disneyland, and now he's going to be in a car, and I just let that thought come and go, and then I'd go back to what I'm doing, and then I'd remember, and it's just such a gift. The person who had the insight really just resonated with her, Amy's book, and that quote. She said, "If our natural state is pure well-being and peace of mind, truth feels like peace." And that is so incredibly true. One thing that being in the three principles conversation, I've had so many life-changing insights. And I came into this conversation because of severe driving anxiety and panic attacks. But I was also dealing with a whole load of other anxious, insecure thinking. And one of the areas was around health. I had had worried health thoughts that I validated for almost my whole life, whether it was just about my parents' death and then cancer and brain tumors and brain cancer and just so much stuff for most of my life. And being in the three principles conversation, my health anxiety just completely fell away. And I share more about that in other videos too, but I wanted to kind of highlight, like, truth feels like peace. What was different was being in the conversation. There were so many people, hopeful, resilient stories around people with all types of like health things, health diagnoses, cancer without fear. And this person said, I wasn't happy to have cancer, but I was happy despite having cancer. Oh, I wish I kind of had that book printed out. It's called A Life Less Serious by George Halfin. It's so good. Maybe I'm going to get a hard copy of it so I can read it to you all. Some of it. I mean, I can from my Kindle. Okay, tangent. Back to what I was saying. I remember listening. So pre-three principles, if I saw a video on someone who had cancer or something with health, I'd be like, I'd make it about me. Because that's sometimes what brains do. What if that happened to me and I would live? I didn't see that it was my imagination creating these future scary scenarios. I would be like, I didn't see it. I didn't see it as this invitation. I'd get scared. But then once I was listening to this woman who I think was even in the three principles community, and she was talking about how she was gradually like losing her vision and going blind. And then I had the very normal thought, like, well, what if that happened to me? But it wasn't fearful. It was more just curious. And right on the heels was, because I thought, how would I be a parent and how would I drive my kids to sports and pick them up? And then it was right on the heels of that thought was, oh, you'd figure it out. Like it was this feeling that it would be gradual. Like if it was her, what would be gradual? And I just adapt. That's truth. That felt like peace. And if I ever even, a lot of people wonder, how am I calm when I'm waiting for test results? And it's because I know that future me can handle it. And that's true. That feels like peace. Even if it's cancer. Future me will figure it out because I'm made of wisdom and common sense. So are you. I love that. If our natural state is pure well-being and peace of mind, truth feels like peace. What's been really helpful for me, the principles are facts. They're not, I think what was so life-changing coming into the three principles conversation was the simplicity and like, these are just facts. This just describes how we work as human beings. The fact that thoughts always coming and going, we can't deny that. We really can't. Thought flows, we can't deny that. Well, I guess that's the first one I said. We feel our thinking. We really do. Consciousness gives us a full experience of our thinking. And that also, we have this universal mind, this innate intelligence. So just a recap of what I was saying. The three principles are mind, which is this universal intelligence, this divine wisdom, which we can't deny, because how do people grow babies? And that there's zebras and chameleons who like change colors, and there's planets and plants. Like we know that there is some deeper intelligence, something behind the brain that powers it, that powers our circulatory system and heals broken bones. And oh my gosh, like that's a fact that there is this deeper intelligence in humans, in animals, in the world, like the moon and the sun and the stars. Like it doesn't even have to be woo-woo. We can say, oh yeah, there is this deeper intelligence. That's mind. Thought is the fact that we have thought. That's how we experience life. Thought is such a gift. Sometimes we can innocently misuse this gift of thought when we believe thinking that scares us, and we keep on thinking and trying to use our intellect, forgetting that we have wisdom and common sense. So that's thought. There's a lot more on it, and I'm not going to do a whole thing. But I know that sometimes people pop in watching a video, and they might be like, what are you talking about, the three principles? For me, when I realized that my wisdom and common sense got me through every panic attack. That was one of my first insights, getting a glimpse that there was something beyond my thinking, because I'd been using my intellect, and our intellect is great, but it's not so great when it comes to mental health. Just as it's not, using my intellect to heal a broken bone isn't going to be helpful. Just like using my intellect of like, what am I going to do with a health concern? Well, the intellect's going to freak out. That was an insight. And then I saw with thought, how just because I had a thought didn't mean it was true. And that the nature of thought is that it flows. I thought that there was so much more I needed to do to have new thought. I need to think positively. I need to tap. I need to put my legs up the wall. I need to do a finger hold. No. The nature of thought is that it flows. I'm always one thought away from a whole new experience. I saw that yesterday being at Disneyland. It was so crowded. I had not been to Disneyland in 25 years. There was one point when it was raining, and we went in to get ice cream just to get under the shade. It was like so crowded. There were so many people. And sometimes I'd have thoughts like there's so many people. And I just was like, well, I just let that thought go. I get to choose the thoughts that wish me well. I'd think, well, there's so many people and so many more hours here. And the final principle is consciousness, which there's kind of two parts. Consciousness brings our thought to life, so we have a very full experience. And consciousness also just relates to our state of mind. Consciousness goes up and down. We can't deny that. Sometimes we're in a lower state of mind, like at 3 a.m. Sometimes if we're worrying, and then at 9 a.m., it's not as bad. I saw my consciousness change. I was kind of tired, waiting in line for the Millennium Falcon. And then my nephew, who's 4, loved it. He loved it. And it was like, I don't know if you've been on it, and he loved it. And seeing him so happy. And also I sat on the ride. Oh, there was my state of mind. It rose. So the principles are just fundamental truths. And when you see them, it can really help put an end to insecurity and anxiety and fear. It doesn't mean that we never have an insecure thought, but why I'm sharing that is the feeling of insecurity is looking for exceptions. But what if this time it isn't thought? But what if this time it isn't true? But what if, we don't search for possible exceptions when we understand that something is just true. We only do that with concepts. And what I want to start for you to get is the principles are not concepts. They're fundamental truths. They're happening whether you know about them or not. We don't get insecure about gravity. We don't say, well, what if, gravity doesn't hold me on the earth here? It's like, we don't even question gravity. And the principles, whether you were in the 3 principles conversation or not, they are just happening. Sid just tried to put them into explainable things, but the principles are happening whether we know about them or not. And the reason for me, when I see the principles as fundamental truths, it's so essential because it's almost like I can never unsee them. It really has helped me be so much more secure and fear my experience less. That's when Sid Banks said, this was one of the earlier quotes of his that I heard. If the only thing that people learned was not to fear their experience, that alone would change the world. And that's being in this conversation helped change my world. If I know how it works, then I'm no longer taking seriously any thought, but what if this time? It doesn't mean I don't have that thought. Sometimes I do. Sometimes if I had experienced derealization, which was my scariest symptom, what if this time it's not DPDR? What if this isn't anxiety? Oh, it's like I understand. I understand everything that I've been talking about here. And I'm not being like, oh, I understand it, but I do, or else I wouldn't be sharing it with you. Being in this conversation has truly allowed me to have so much freedom because I'm not thinking, but what if this? What if this time? What if this time? Doesn't mean I don't have those thoughts. As I said, I had that thought, what if he got lost? What if my son got lost? But fear, anxiety, and insecurity are invitations that there is a world beyond our thinking. When we feel fearful, when we feel anxious, when we feel insecure, it's not a problem. It is such a gift. It is so helpful to let us know that we're using our imagination innocently to scare us. It invites us to let our thinking go and go make room for something new. And when we don't have to worry about fear, we're free to live. We don't have to have anxiety about anxiety. You know, I thought of this also yesterday because it started raining at Disneyland. None of us knew. None of us knew. But well, we understand rain, you know, like that's another kind of fact. Sometimes actually it does rain, but we also understood the fact that we'd figure it out. Like if it just kept raining, we didn't need to think about what to do because future us would figure it out. We'd decide, well, do we leave the park or whatever? But we also understood the fundamental truth that sometimes rain comes and it goes, you know, and we also understood technology, and we looked at our phones and it was like, oh, it's going to rain for about an hour. You know, and I know a lot of people sometimes are like, well, what if anxiety showed up at Disneyland or at a party or on a cruise? Well, when you understand it, you don't have to worry because you understand, well, it's just a bunch of fearful thinking that's distorted, but it's temporary and it changes all on its own. Just like the rain yesterday. You know, it's true. It's such a great example because it was raining and we didn't have to be like, stop rain or whatever. We went inside, we ate some ice cream. And then we left. It's like we were free to live. I had put this quote already, but I just love it so much by Sid. If the only thing that people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. And what I want you to do is consider, what if you didn't have to be afraid of being afraid? What if you didn't have to have anxiety about anxiety because you could understand it? You know, you could understand, oh, it's not a problem when I feel anxious. It's actually a gift. Or it's like, you know, also you don't have to love it. You don't have to think it's a gift. But if you see it as an invitation, as just a signal, well, my thinking's distorted. But that's not a problem because everyone gets distorted thinking. You know, and you might pop up, what did I do wrong? Why am I anxious? If I really understood the principles, I wouldn't be anxious. Nah, don't even entertain that thinking. You just see, oh, when I feel anxious, I'm just going to leave all my thinking alone. I saw that really clearly just a few weeks ago. Because if I ever felt anxious, I didn't resist it. I'd only feel anxious for a few minutes, but I would still entertain the thoughts. What did I do? I used to think, if I figure it out, then I'll never do this, rather than just seeing it truly as a time to let go of all thought. Fall into something deeper. Fall into a feeling of love and wisdom. So that is it. I hope this was helpful.